Imagine you had a superpower, and that power was the ability to transform what someone thought about something. Now, I admit it's not as sexy as the ability to fly or become invisible, but unlike those superpowers, this one might actually be real. In today's episode, I spoke with one of my longtime friends, Damon Versaggi, who has taken his ability to transform people's preconceived notions, and he's brought it to his passion for food and food education. You'll hear about how he started out in television production after college and how eventually losing creativity at work led him to his true passion in what he says is the art of cooking. He turned dinner parties with friends into Scrappy Meals, a creative food agency that is changing the culture of food and food education. And if you're out there thinking, but I have no interest in cooking, well, to be completely honest, neither do I. But luckily, this is not just a story about cooking, in the same way that any story about Damon Versaggi could never be just one thing.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Some people say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and to surround yourself with people who are better than you. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. My name is Matt Connolly, and this is Better Than Me, a podcast where I get the chance to talk to artists, creators, entrepreneurs, and the people who inspire me about how they got to where they are today and what inspires them. I'm cheating a little with this podcast by being able to talk to someone that I know. Damon and I went to college together, and not only that, but we had almost every single class together. I say this not to prove anything, except to say that whatever I thought of Damon at any point during our friendship, he was able to unintentionally, or possibly very intentionally, change any preconceived notions I had of him. I almost didn't even recognize it until we spoke for this podcast, how he has this ability to take whatever label you might apply to him and turn it on its head. One of the driving factors in Damon's creativity is his determination to transform. That transformation comes in so many different forms, going all the way back to my preconceived notions on what I thought an Italian dude from the heart of Brooklyn was doing in the 3D animation program at art school.
I never thought I'd go to art school. I didn't think I'd get into art school. So I was thinking about going to culinary school because I was thinking like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do.
You really did like food that much before even?
Oh yeah. I've always loved food. Food was always, it's my first, I just never wanted to be a chef.
Right. So then you feel like culinary school doesn't make sense because that's just a chef path.
That's what I thought. I was like, well, if I go to culinary school, that means I'm going to wear the big giant white hat. And like, I was like, that's just not me. And I don't want to, yeah, I wasn't really into that.
I don't look good in hats.
I just don't like big hats like that. But so I just never even really, to be honest, thought about it. I just never thought it was even a possibility. So, and also too, like, you know, when I applied to go into art school, I wouldn't say pressure from my parents, but my parents were like, we both wanted to be artists. You're our last hope.
Oh, really? That's so interesting.
Yeah. And I remember my mom was like, I got it's a portfolio day review for SVA. I think you should look into it. I think we should go to it. And I was like, this thing is next week. And I don't even know what a portfolio is.
I don't have a portfolio.
I don't have a portfolio. I don't know what it is. And so my mother and my father would like just sit down. Like every day I'd come home from school, sit down at the dinner table and after dinner and like work on an art piece. I'd sometimes be up until like 2-3 in the morning. And that was my portfolio. I did that for like a month.
Damon's hard work paid off and he got into School of Visual Arts. And even though he was in the 3D department, he was still trying to figure out where his real passions were. But there was a few things that stuck with him more than others.
Well, the stuff I really look back and like took from SVA, like the studying of animation and like the studying of Chuck Jones. And I remember studying like Looney Tunes and like having
like the history behind it.
Yeah. And having a class. So I'm like, damn, I'm watching Bugs Bunny cartoons for school. Like that was really, I remember studying this. I'm like, and it's like the storytelling, but also just like the character development and really how these characters, like what makes these characters who they are and all that stuff.
Looking back, it makes sense that the character development aspect of animation and cartoons was something that Damon identified with. After college, he thought about developing a children's book with his thesis character, but just didn't feel ready. But the idea of a children's book that Damon wanted to make did find its way back to him many, many years later. But right after graduating, he was ready to use his 3D skills and started at a place called VizRT, a software company that works in real-time graphics. But what he did there was not originally what he thought.
I applied for the wrong job. Like I didn't know it was like a job in television. because I went to their website and they did a bunch of the reenact, like the disaster models. So like if a plane crashed, like you saw the web, like, oh, I guess they just model.
Like this is what would happen if.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I guess I could do that for a little bit just to get a paycheck. And then little did I know, it's like, no, it was like I was in the creative department for the company. What I had to do was learn the software, train people, demos, tech support. My first year I flew 120,000 miles.
Holy cow! Oh, so it was traveling around and going to these places.
Yeah, I did a bunch of NBA basketball games on ESPN. Like it was actually like probably one of the greatest things that ever happened because I literally got thrown into it from like right off the bat. So when I worked in television, worked for Viz, which was a real-time 3D gaming engine, basically, the ability to have like real-time rendering, it changed how I create. Like it was very intriguing to me.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. The idea that I never thought about that because like now there's like a resurgence in like Unreal and real-time stuff.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, you were kind of at the beginning of that.
Well, the funny thing is, like most people, whenever I would tell them what I did, oh, you do that's the banners and the. I'm like, yeah, that's part of it, but it's like, to be honest, it's like plugging in a video game system and putting it live on air. You could bring in import 3D models. You could bring in all this geometry. You're baking textures, like these virtual studios and these virtual sets. It's all video game basically. So that being exposed to that like right out of college was great. I enjoyed working at Viz. Like I really.
And you were there for a while.
I was there for about 4 years, and then I left Viz and went to Sportsnet New York, which is the Mets channel. SNY. It was great because there was like so many different types of projects, and I loved being in that real time world. It reminded me of being like, it had like the same feeling of being in a kitchen almost, and vice versa. Like being in the kitchen feels like live television to me.
A few years later, Damon changed jobs once again, this time working for Tribune Media. But as you'll hear, it wasn't as creative as his previous jobs, and out of this began the seed for his passion project to form. Damon launched Scrappy Meals, which was started with the idea that food waste can be resolved with simplicity and creativity. Damon seems to always have had the ability to maintain an open mind when it comes to his career path, as well as the things he loves in life. Although cooking and food was always a passion of his, he never chased it down as a career. He instead admits that all of the best things in his life have come to him more organically, and Scrappy Meals was no different.
I started Scrappy Meals in like 2016, January of 2016. But the thing was, I really started doing it a few years earlier. I wasn't identifying it as Scrappy Meals, right? So I was like starting to cook at work. And my job, at the time I was working for Tribune Media. I was in their creative department, but I was basically like a glorified IT guy.
Right.
But it paid well. I was at a point where most of the jobs that were better for me in terms of finance, everything, were less creative, right? Which actually led to me cooking, you know?
Like because you were looking for that, because you were missing it, like the artistic side?
Yeah, I was missing something, and I knew that. And I remember being, it was probably right around my father passed away. And I took my mom out for like Mother's Day brunch or something like that. And she said to me, she's like, Dame, when are you going to meet somebody? And the first thing that came to my mind was food. And I told my mother, I was like,
sorry.
Yeah. I was like, no, you know what, Mom? I hope to one day, maybe I'll get married. I don't know.
To food.
But, yeah. But I told her, I was like, I really want to do something with food in my life. Like, that's what I want that's what I'm in love with is food. And my mother was just like, okay, whatever. She didn't really understand what I was. She didn't get it. But that really from that moment, I kept thinking to myself, like, not how do I leave television or working in TV and transition to food, but like, how do I identify what it is, this thing that I wasn't working in a restaurant that I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a chef.
Right.
So for me, all the careers that I've normally associated with food, I didn't want any of those. So I was trying to think like, well, what could it be?
I guess you were from work, you were already in the mindset of, let me get out of what I'm doing. I'm missing something from my life. It's not a love life. It's this creative passion.
I felt like in my career, I was developing mold. You know, I felt like I was becoming very stagnant, and it's like not the projects, the work wasn't really motivating me, and I knew that. I accepted the job kind of understanding that it was going to be less of a creative position than it.
When you're actually to the point of like, okay, I want to work in food, I don't want to be a chef, because there's not many paths, I guess, right?
From telling my mom like that I knew that food was important to me, it probably was a couple of years before I really started doing Scrappy Meals, because again, like I stumbled upon cooking as almost as an accident. I was moving apartments. I carried all my kitchen stuff to my office one day, and I just left stuff there. And then I'd always open up the fridge at work, and people would be leaving food in it. And I was like, is anyone gonna have this food? Like, what is? I go through, and people are like, oh no, you could have it. And then I started just cooking at work. I took my griddle, I took my rice cooker, and I would make whatever was in the people would bring for lunch. And like they say, oh, you can make something with this. People would literally bring food in, and I'd make it at work. So I was like, we do like a once a week meeting, and I'd make a little something. So that's really how it started.
What did you enjoy most about doing that? Was it the like creativeness of how to figure out what to do with these leftovers? Or was it more like the fact that you're like basically creating something out of something that someone was going to throw away?
Yeah, that's always been something like I that's how I cooked. I've always just looked at what's in the fridge and I'm like, all right, I can make something. And that spontaneous way of cooking always appealed to me. But also I just love the fact that, well, my office is right by the kitchen.
Right.
So it was very easy for me to like, and again, I wasn't doing a very creative, fulfilling job.
Yeah.
But I found like creativity in like making these dishes for people. I was making deviled eggs in a rice cooker. Right. like I was doing stuff that was like, a little off kilter, and it was a lot of fun.
With his passion for cooking and creativity reignited, Damon began to host dinner parties while also attending a lot more potlucks, where he noticed people bringing a lot more food than was needed.
I just felt like, why don't we do like dinner parties where just bring whatever's in your fridge? And then I was making stuff with whatever people were bringing. And that was happening at the same time I was working, still working at Tribune and doing TV stuff. But then I started like cooking a little bit at work, and it kind of started overlapping, and I was cooking more and more. So at first, Scrappy Meals really started with like doing dinner parties and while working at like still having my job at TV.
Like it was initially more like the leftovers thing of like, take your leftovers, let's turn it into something.
Yeah, take your leftovers.
Like not waste food.
Yeah, we have enough food in the fridge. We don't need to be buying food specifically for, I feel like a lot of people, if they do a potluck, they're buying a lot of stuff that they don't necessarily need just for one dish, for example. So I tried to really just kind of curtail that within my friends, and it was a lot of fun. I did a lot of those dinners, and I was working on a gig for one of my former clients, like for WPIX, which is Channel 11. And they were asking me, they're like, are you still doing that like Scrappy Meals thing? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, all right, we want to put you on a morning segment.
Okay, so I'm talking to you moms right now because getting kids to eat their vegetables can be really tricky.
But given the right recipe, you can really turn those finicky eaters into nutritious nibblers. So joining us this morning, Damon Versaggi. He's the man behind Scrappy Meals. So what is Scrappy Meals? And I think this is more for just adults as well, because I'm a picky eater.
Scrappy Meals is a creative food agency focused on getting people to look at food in a different way.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people would start in their own fridge with leftovers, so it's to get people, kids especially, excited about food.
So the mission behind it was to get kids to want to look at leftovers and say, okay, I can eat that, I want to eat that, Mom and Dad.
Well, just to get kids excited about food in general.
Right.
And also to a lot of kids, they're scared of food at an early age, just showing them, hey, it can be fun and exciting, like over there in front of you is green eggs and ham.
Right.
So taking like kale stems and putting that with a little cream, and then you could dye the eggs with it.
But the coolest part about it was the fact that like someone in the city council saw it, and then they got a hold of the producer, and they were like, they invited me to testify for a food waste bill.
Oh, wow.
Which was like something that I kind of wasn't expecting. Like, I was doing Scrappy Meals at this point for a year maybe, and I was just really doing it as dinner parties for fun. I wasn't really thinking about anything more than that. And
It was just a hobby at that point.
It was a hobby, and I wasn't even thinking of it as a business.
Yeah.
But then once I kind of got this invitation, I took it really seriously because I had a friend say to me, "You can't go to City Hall and not know what these people are talking about."
Right.
And I was like, "You're right." And I studied the food laws. I got my food and health certification, and and it gave me an opportunity to go to City Hall and like really listen to what these people had to say. And I felt like I had some information that they didn't really think about. I even said that, in order to get rid of food waste, you have to get rid of the phrase altogether. Because food is it's not waste. It's neglected. But food is not like there's the two words don't even
like saying food waste is assuming that it's like already garbage or something.
Yes, it's a lazy way to categorize it and talk about it.
Once Damon put Scrappy Meals out into the world, things started to fall into place for where he wanted to take it. He seemed to be bringing a fresh take on the conversation about food waste. Even I can admit that term, conversation about food waste, sounds pretty boring. Not only is it a big issue that can be hard to tackle, but it's definitely not everyone's passion. It's the exact reason I think it takes someone like Damon to tackle it. He began working on a children's book, and during that time got reached out to by a friend who worked with a company affiliated with the United Nations.
So she was just saying, she was like, "Are you still doing Scrappy Meals? Are you doing events?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm also publishing a children's book." She was like, "Oh, that's great. We're doing some during Climate Week. They were doing like an event, and they asked me to do was talk about the kids' book and if I'd cook for about 50 to 60 people." So I was like, sure, yeah, why not?
Right.
So then I cooked for like that whole week. I cooked for probably over like close to 100 people.
Jeez.
And doing all these events and doing these dinner parties, and that's my culinary education. I almost had to like make up for not going to culinary school, and it's a lot of fun too for me. So
sort of throwing yourself right into the fire.
Yeah. It's always how I feel like is the best way to, either you're gonna sink or swim. You'll know right away where you stand, basically. But no, that was a great event. That was a life-changing event, the UN, because you have like some idea of like what you're doing is like, oh, it's not possible to have some sort of impact, but really you can. You really can have an impact. Going to the UN and in such a small like part of it, and to see like, wait a second, we're not talking about this problem. The same thing with food, we're just not talking about it right.
With each step and every event, Damon was creating a message and brand around food education and food waste. He took the brand even further by creating Scrap's Food Guide from A to Z, a book aimed at kids that included some interesting facts to keep adults interested as well. It focused on helping develop a healthy relationship with what we eat at an early age. And with the creation of his children's book, he began to really transform the line between chef and artist. And as an artist by trade, he actually struggled and pushed back against being labeled as a chef.
Once I got into that culinary world more so, I always, at first, my first entry into it, I was embarrassed that I wasn't culinary focused. Like, oh, I'm an artist. I went to art school. I didn't go to culinary school. So I felt in a way like I wasn't confident in talking about food because of that.
It's almost like you don't want to be shunned by like the actual chefs.
Yes, I almost felt like in a way like I would lose. I had no credibility in that sense.
Of course.
But the more, which led me to really make sure that I made a point to be like, when people said like, "Oh, this is Chef Damon," like, no, I'm an artist.
Right. Because you had confidence in saying you were an artist.
Yes.
But not in saying that you were a chef.
I had confidence in doing what I thought, which is like, I look at food as an art medium.
Yeah.
Like Scrappy Meals is an art project for me, but people want to call it like all these other things, and they could. That's fine. It's that too. But at the end of the day, food is art. I don't see it. I don't see it any different than anything else. Same way, like music is art. There's all these different mediums, and you could, some are on the line, but it's like what I'm doing with Scrappy Meals and food is to connect it more to an art. So Scrap's Food Guide, the book, really came about because I created Scraps as like a little mascot. I basically made this little character, little raccoon chef, curioso, food curious scavenger, so to speak. That what I wanted to do is like whenever I was doing an event, I had like a little 3D printed toy of him. So like that's like that. I'll bring it to events and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh, this could be everyone's like, oh, it's the mascot.
What made you even think to do that in the first place? Like, were you initially thinking about like branding of what you were doing, or what made you think like
Not
I'm
at
gonna make
all.
a mascot?
My brother-in-law tagged me in a Geico commercial with the raccoon making food from the
funny.
garbage, and he's like, "That's you." And then I was like sitting, I was like, you know what? This is like an awesome. That'd be like a cool character, especially because at the time, like, probably like 2 years after doing Scrappy Meals, starting it, I realized like kids is where I need to focus a lot of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Just because it's hard to get an adult to change the way they eat. It's a lot easier to encourage a child to have a positive mindset with food.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was developing like this. It brought me full circle back to being in school again, almost. And like the time out of school where I was like, wait a second, I'm able to like create these characters, and maybe I'm finally able to make this kid's book that I thought about making 15 years ago, and I just never felt like I was ready to do it.
Yeah.
And then I just was like, I had friends, I had family just like, just make it, just do it.
It's like in the past, like the substance was never there. Like you had the drive to want to make a book, but like you didn't really have the concept of why.
I wasn't ready, to be honest. I wasn't. A, I didn't want to do it back then.
Yeah, yeah.
And then B, now I just looked at it as like, you know what? I was just curious. I was like, what? How difficult can this be? It was a lot harder than I realized. Publishing is just a really interesting world, but I was just like, you know what, let me just do it. And because again, like Scrappy Meals is always about food, of course. That's like what brings you there. But to be honest, it's like I wanted to teach and educate through using this character as a mechanism for that. The book was like the starting point for all that for me.
Can I ask you about this book?
Yes.
Okay, what do you see on the cover of the book?
Raccoon.
Yeah, and what is he wearing? Is he wearing a hat?
A hat.
What kind of hat?
A cuckoo hat.
A cooker hat? A chef's hat?
Yeah, chef's hat.
What else do you know? What do you see?
I see the alphabet.
Ooh, and then for the letter A, what do we see? You eat it sometimes.
A avocado.
Let's see. I know what letter you like. What's that one?
C.
The letter C. Just like your name, right? And what do you see for the letter C?
I see a
You know what that
a
is.
carrot.
A carrot.
A carrot.
And what is he doing? The raccoon.
The raccoon he's cooking it.
We take them for granted when it comes to stuff like this, and we think like, oh, they're too young to know any better. And in fact, kids actually are more, especially when it comes to food, they know more than they might lead on, and they're more receptive. They're definitely receptive. So it's like, again, all I'm trying to do with this book especially is it's an introduction to like changing like just a positive mindset around food.
So much of what Damon's doing involves the idea of being connected to each other, sharing experiences with people, and using that experience to teach and learn. And for many people, this year was filled with big plans. But in no time, most of those plans had to completely change. Damon's path during this year echoes what a lot of people went through. For him, another block in the road led to another pivot and refocus on the things he found important with Scrappy Meals.
It's so interesting and weird because simultaneously, one of the greatest things that happened was also one of the worst. Like I was overseas, like trying to do a bunch of events. I had this trip planned for a while. I was going to go for a month to London, do the London Book Fair, try and get almost like a book agent out there, and then from there go to Sweden and do a couple of Scrappy Meals events promoting the book at a very big restaurant in Stockholm, because my friend is the sustainability director there. Yes, they have a position called sustainability director. Right?
Yeah.
You don't hear that often. A lot of what I want to do with Scrappy Meals is emulate like a Scandinavian culture when it comes to food. The cooking is very much a part of that culture, and I think it's something that lacks in our society is looking at the opportunities for cooking as a beyond the chore, beyond just like a task that we're forcing ourselves to do. Especially in today's day and age that we're so, disconnected in person, like using cooking as that family time and all this stuff. Just like I was a day ahead of COVID. I even checked and called. I was like, are we still canceling these events in Sweden? And they're like, no, things are good with us.
Yeah.
Didn't even hit them yet. So I was like, okay, I might as well just go. And then I could go from London to Sweden. I know I might not be able to do these events, but I have to like show these people how serious I am. And,
Right.
and this is also like, I remember talking to my mom about it because she was freaking out. She was like, oh, she's like, Dame, you got to come back. And I'm like, Ma, like, this is my dream. Like, I'm out here trying to see if like, this is what I've been working years to come back and see if I could do Scrappy Meals out here, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I have to go and see what this is all about. And
You literally almost like had built up to, like, you were building Scrappy Meals up to this moment.
I was really like, this was it. I was gonna, I was gonna be on the news out in Sweden for these events. They were gonna have TV news crews and stuff filming it. But in that time of not being able to do that, I stumbled upon my friend. He said, oh, my brother just got a job at cooking for a school, so he wants to meet you. He said, and I go down to this school. I meet his brother, who's a chef for this school. And he's like, oh, yeah, the kids love Scrappy Meals. I was like, what? You telling me these kids know about Scrappy Meals? He's like, yeah, I tell them. He's like, they have the like a magnet or something like that. He bought it online, or like from, I don't know, it's something on
This
the
is
store.
in Sweden?
Yeah, in Sweden. And he's like, yeah, the kids love Scrappy Meals. And I'm like, he's like, can you think you could get us to get the kids excited about eating vegetables? And I'm like, you know what? I think I can. And I was like, that's in a sense, like that gave me this, like, wait a second, this is what this is about. It's not about dinner parties. It's not about catered events. It's about, I think I have a good chance of getting kids excited about eating vegetables. I think I could, all right, let me try and solve this, or let me try and put my efforts into this problem rather than something else. So, so I kind of, and I, on the flight back, believe me, I was flying back, COVID, 10 people on the plane. I got into Newark, like no one in the airport. It was like the end of, I think it was like my sister's birthday. It was like March 29th. And I was going to be like, okay, I'm going to be in my apartment for a couple of weeks. I better try and figure out, what I'm doing with this stuff.
Yeah.
So, it was like kind of, I needed that, I kind of needed that time to like focus in on this. So it was
that the way everything unfolded sort of forced you to kind of reevaluate like what you were doing.
It's kind of like 2020 is all about pivoting.
Yeah.
It's like you gotta react and you gotta pivot. And I was doing a lot of events focused stuff, a lot of pop-ups, a lot of different, trying to cater to the masses in a sense.
Yeah.
And that stuff is a lot of work. It's almost wasn't worth it. And COVID gave me the ability to like really step back and look and like, wait a second, this isn't about me doing events. It's not about, it's not even about really the culinary side to it. It's me now being able to provide educational content and a different way of people accessing this information.
More content driven than like, I'm cooking for 20 people and that's the end of that.
Yes. It's more, the focus is now more on the content. And, I'm doing Zoom classes for kids. I'm doing, I did a creative plating class for like 120 kids. Like I did a whole presentation on like how the art of food and how we eat with our eyes, like to these kids. Right. So
that's fun. Yeah, that kind of stuff is fun.
And that stuff has been more fulfilling in a sense.
During this time, the challenges have helped Damon to recognize the core path of Scrappy Meals and his ultimate mission. I can admit, for me, food education for kids sounds like a challenging goal. But as with everything, Damon is always transforming what those preconceived notions might be. As an artist, Damon is looking to bring his passions for food and art together with his skills in technology and production.
So currently, I'm really trying to develop some sort of content and programming. And for me, the children's book was the first step to that. And again, there's a reason I started with like 3 and up and little kids, is because I want to build like different tiers and different audiences as I'm getting older. So the next book is the Scraps in the Back Food Rap Almanac, which is
It's a cool name.
The inspired by the Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss with the rhyming and stuff like that. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is to write it with the inspiration of that, but with food, and also trying to introduce some sort of augmented content that will get children and adults a little excited. So for me, augmented reality, augmented experiences, something that's going to, get people to learn about this stuff in a different way. So a lot of, I would say going forward, my focus is content driven and experience driven. And then hopefully when it's good to get back and do events and stuff like that on a bigger scale, to hopefully have some sort of, get back more into that. But until
the other day we were talking, you described, you started originally, I think, saying like a creative food agency.
Yeah.
You're trying to change the culture around food. Is that the term you would use?
I'm trying to give people a new perspective, and like, you don't have to, I'm not trying to change people. I don't think that's possible. I think people change themselves. But if I could give someone that maybe normally wouldn't look at just their fridge, right? Look at what's inside your fridge in a different way, then mission accomplished. Then I could rest easy and know that, okay, that's all I got to do. I could tell you, when I started doing this in like dinner parties, I did not think I'd be cooking at the UN. I didn't think I'd be cooking in Sweden. I didn't think I'd be doing this like at all. And it just like, but someone says something to somebody, and someone sees something, and then here you are. So it's kind of like, I think the biggest thing was I was so open to it, and I was aware that, I love doing this. That's all that matters. It's funny, like the greatest things in my life I've really never expected. I never expected to go to art school, and that was one of the greatest. Like, I never expected to stumble upon doing Scrappy Meal stuff. I think that's why it's key to like focus on doing stuff that you care about, because that will always bring you to where you need to be.
Damon's openness and willingness to learn and have his ideas be transformed is part of why he is so passionate about transforming others. He has some big goals with Scrappy Meals, and it continues to evolve as he evolves as an artist. I have no doubt that the Italian guy from Brooklyn who I met in art school, who transformed my mind about what it means to be an artist, will succeed in helping change the culture of food and food education for the 21st century. Damon admits he'd never changed the decisions he's made as they brought him to where he is today, but if he had to give his younger self some advice, it's something I think every artist and creative can benefit from.
Remain optimistic. Don't be discouraged. Things are going to be difficult. You're going to get beat up with things. You're going to be down. But as long as you believe in what you're doing, like you remain optimistic in what you're doing, then that's all you could really want. It's like a lot of times when I was younger, I wasn't confident in myself or what I was doing. Then as I got older, I got confident in myself, but I didn't like what I was doing. You know what I mean? So it's like, so you got to remain focused and optimistic, and just stay the course. Like, because the only way you're going to stop doing your dreams is if you choose to not do it. Keep up at it every day, or if you just keep forward, even if you take a break, but if you just remain on the forward track, then I think then you definitely have a chance.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. You can subscribe for more episodes wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find us on Instagram at Better Than Me Show. I'm your host for Better Than Me, Matt Connolly, and thank you so much to my good friend Damon Versaggi, who you can follow on Instagram at Scrappy Meals. All the music used in the show can be found in the show links, and I hope to see you next time.